Daniel Holt had always been drawn to places that most people avoided. At 32, he had already crossed the Atacama, wandered alone through the Mojave, and trekked across Australia's Simpson Desert with nothing but a backpack and an old camera. To his friends in London, he was the desert guy, the one who craved the silence of sand over the noise of the city. But for Daniel, it was more than just adventure, it was an obsession. In April 2015, Daniel set his sights on the Moroccan Sahara. His plan: drive deep into the Chigaga Dunes, one of the most remote corners of the desert, where the sand seems to stretch forever and the winds erase yesterday's footprints by morning. He wanted to document it all: the shifting dunes, the light at dawn, the mirage-like heat waves. His social media filled with photos of Berber villages, wide ochre landscapes, and cryptic captions like "Where silence becomes music" and "Following the old winds." He was last seen in Mohammed, a small frontier town at the edge of the Sahara, where locals still guide tourists by camel caravan. He bought extra water, filled 2 jerry cans with fuel, and loaded his modified Toyota Land Cruiser with camping gear. Witnesses remembered him smiling, polite, asking about routes no traveler took. Locals warned him, "Beyond Chigaga, the land changes. There are no signs, no roads, no rescue." But Daniel only laughed, thanking them in French before driving south, swallowed by dust. For days, friends and family watched his updates online. Photos of empty sandscapes, a shot of his dusty boots, a selfie at sunset with dunes behind him. And then, abruptly, nothing. No posts, no messages, no check-ins. At first, no one panicked. Daniel sometimes went off-grid, disappeared into wildernesses with only his camera and thoughts. But as days turned to a week, unease crept in. His sister Emma tried calling his satellite phone. Voicemail. His friends messaged him, their texts unread. By the time 2 weeks passed, a quiet dread had settled over them all. Somewhere beyond the edge of civilization, Daniel Holt had vanished. The last message came at 7:16 p.m., Morocco time. A satellite pinged to Emma's phone. "Made it to Chigaga, pushing further tomorrow." Attached was a photo: sand dunes rippling to the horizon, his Land Cruiser parked like a toy on the edge of the world. Emma smiled when she saw it, texting back, "Be safe. Love you." But the checkmark never turned blue. The next morning, Daniel's Instagram updated with a single post, a shot of the dawn sky, thin strands of pink and gold over a dark sea of sand. The caption read, "Stillness before the sun," and then nothing. No posts, no calls, no satellite messages. At first, Emma told herself he was just unplugged, living the experience. Daniel had always said connection was a crutch, that to really feel the desert, you had to let it strip you down. But when 2, then 3 days passed, her confidence cracked. She called his satellite phone again and again, each time met with the sterile automated message, "This number is currently unavailable." Meanwhile, his last GPS coordinates showed him past Chigaga, near a region called El Guera, a place few people visited, known for its brutal terrain and labyrinthine dunes. Emma reached out to the British consulate in Rabat, explaining that her brother was missing. Moroccan authorities were alerted, but the response was slow. Foreigners wandered into the desert sometimes, usually they wandered back. But by the end of the week, Daniel's silence was undeniable. His bank account sat untouched, his vehicle's satellite tracker had stopped sending pings, and local guides reported seeing no trace of a solo traveler in the area. Emma's worry turned to dread. She opened his last message again, her thumb lingering over the image, over the simple words. "Pushing further tomorrow." The desert swallowed many things: caravans, camels, entire salt roads, but it wasn't supposed to swallow Daniel, not him. And yet, somewhere past that last photo, somewhere beyond the camera's frame, Daniel Holt had crossed a line, stepped into a part of the Sahara where even the wind seemed to whisper, "No one will find you." Daniel Holt had mapped his journey with the precision of a man trying to outwit the desert itself. His notebook, recovered later by authorities, was filled with hand-drawn maps, coordinates, and notes scribbled in the margins. Avoid riverbed. Watch dune shifts after noon. Don't trust the horizon. His plan was simple. On paper, cross the Chigaga dunes, head southwest past El Guera, then circle back along the dry salt flats near Lake Iraqi. But maps, no matter how carefully drawn, are only promises. And the Sahara, as explorers know, rarely keeps promises. Local guides in Muhammad had tried to warn him. That route was barely used, not even by the nomads who knew the desert's moods. The sand beyond El Guera was alive, they said, reshaping itself by the hour, turning familiar landmarks into mazes. There were no wells, no phone signals, no landmarks except sky and heat. A Berber elder had quietly told Daniel, "The desert changes. What you think you know, it will take." But Daniel, polite as ever, had only smiled. His vehicle was well prepared. Extra fuel tanks, a satellite beacon, reinforced tires. He had trained for sand driving, learned how to read the ridges and slopes. But what he couldn't train for was the deception of the desert, the way dunes lure you forward, then shift, the way heat ripples blur distances, the way isolation becomes a voice inside your own head. Satellite records showed Daniel's vehicle moving steadily southwest for 2 days, then looping unpredictably, as if searching for a path or correcting a mistake. His final recorded location placed him in a narrow corridor of dunes known for sudden sand collapses, where vehicles often bogged down within minutes. Then, the signal stopped. Theories formed quickly: mechanical failure, equipment malfunction, or worse, a wrong turn into a place with no way back. What Daniel may not have realized is that beyond a certain point, the desert stops being a landscape. It becomes a labyrinth, one you don't walk out of. It was nearly 3 weeks later when a nomad named Salah stumbled onto the vehicle. He was moving his small herd westward, chasing the last patches of green near a remote well, when he saw something glinting at the edge of a dune, not a mirage, not metal wreckage from old smuggling runs, but something newer. Salah approached carefully. The Toyota Land Cruiser sat half buried in sand, like a stranded ship in an ocean of dunes. 3 tires were flat, the 4th nearly buried to the axle. Sand had piled up against the driver's side, and the windshield was cracked, as if from heat or shifting weight. The keys were still in the ignition. Salah circled the vehicle, noting the faded footprints around it, almost gone now, the scattered pieces of gear, a water canteen, a sun-bleached hat, a tire jack half dug into the sand. Inside, the car was eerily intact. The passenger seat held a camera bag, a notebook, a folded map with sweat-stained edges. The back seat was crammed with supplies, some opened, some untouched. Water jugs, dehydrated food packs, a first aid kit still sealed. The dashboard screen showed an empty battery warning. Salah found no blood, no signs of struggle, just the suffocating stillness of a journey abandoned mid-breath. When he reached the nearest outpost days later, Salah told his story. By then, the desert had already taken what it wanted. The Moroccan authorities organized a search, but the window for rescue had long closed. Experts knew the area. With the heat, the isolation, and no water source nearby, survival was counted in hours, not days. News reached Emma back in London. She clutched the photo the authorities sent. Daniel's vehicle, half swallowed by sand, as if the earth itself had tried to erase him. There was no sign of Daniel, no trail, no footprints, no note. Just a car at the end of the world, waiting in silence, as if the driver had simply stepped out and disappeared into the dunes, leaving behind only a ghost. When authorities arrived at the scene, the Land Cruiser looked like a museum exhibit in the middle of nowhere, perfectly still, perfectly silent, a frozen moment left untouched by time. The doors were locked when they arrived, as if Daniel had planned to return, as if stepping away had been temporary. A small rock had been wedged under the back tire, the kind of thing a careful traveler might do to keep a parked car from shifting. Inside, they found his world. His leather-bound journal resting on the passenger seat, pages warped from heat but still legible in places, notes about wind direction, dune patterns, sunrise times. Feel the pull south. One entry read, the handwriting steady, confident. Near it, A handheld GPS unit cracked across the screen. When powered, it flickered but wouldn't lock onto satellites, stuck in an endless, searching for signal loop. The back was orderly, almost meticulous. Water canisters lined up in a neat row, 2 empty, 2 full. Food supplies half used, some ration packs still sealed. His clothes were folded into a corner, next to a camera tripod and several rolls of film, labeled with black marker, Sunset Ridge, Camel Pass, Night Sky. There was no sign of panic, no frantic rummaging, no overturned bags, no scattered gear. It looked, one investigator later said, like someone had gone for a walk and planned to be back for dinner. Most telling was what was missing. His boots were gone. His sun hat, the one seen in his last photo, was gone. And the driver's seatbelt had been fastened behind the seat, a trick used to stop that annoying seatbelt chime from sounding if you were driving without it. It meant he'd last driven with his belt off, moving slowly, cautiously, probably navigating terrain too rough for speed. But if he left the car by choice, why hadn't he returned? Why hadn't he taken more water, more gear? Where was the signal flare, the emergency beacon? The questions pressed into the cabin like the desert heat, heavy and suffocating. The car gave up no answers. Only a hollow echo remained, as if the Sahara itself had reached through the windshield, plucked Daniel Holt from his seat, and carried him away. Once the Land Cruiser was reported, the search effort moved quickly, at least on paper. Local authorities dispatched a small team first, led by gendarmes familiar with the desert's brutal temperament. They were joined by experienced Berber guides, men whose fathers and grandfathers had roamed these sands, who could read the desert the way sailors read the sea. Within 2 days, a perimeter was marked, a 10-kilometer sweep around the vehicle, extending outward in widening arcs. Helicopters joined in, slicing the sky, scanning from above. From the air, the Sahara looked endless, a pale gold ocean where nothing moved but shadow and wind. Searchers below moved carefully, eyes on the ground, looking for anything, a footprint, a scrap of fabric, a discarded bottle. But the Sahara gives little and takes quickly. Wind covered tracks within hours, reshaping the surface so yesterday's path became today's mirage. Emma followed every update from London, clinging to hope. She imagined her brother sitting under a rock ledge somewhere, conserving water, waiting for the hum of helicopters. Daniel was a survivor, she told herself. He'd always been resourceful, always prepared, but as days passed, the calls became less optimistic. Satellite data was pulled, his last pings showed a strange looped path, as if circling or backtracking. Search dogs were flown in but struggled. The heat blurred scent trails, and the vastness swallowed every clue. Guides suggested he might have followed the dunes south, towards a dry riverbed locals called Oued Nam, hoping for shade or water. But that route was known for sudden sinkholes and heat traps, death zones, even for seasoned travelers. By the end of the first week, the search expanded into what one rescuer called impossible country sand seas that swallowed jeeps, jagged rock fields that tore through tires. Teams camped at night, rising at dawn to sweep again, but each day ended the same: nothing. Not a footprint, not a thread, not a sign that Daniel Holt had ever walked those sands. What began as a recovery mission slowly shifted into something heavier, the realization that they were not searching for a man anymore. They were searching for the faintest trace that he had once been there at all. On the 4th day of the search, just as the heat was rising and the wind sharpening, a tracker named Idris found them. He was quiet, deliberate, the kind of man who could read the ground like a page, and what he saw made him stop cold. Barely visible in the shallow crust of sand prints, human, leading south. The others gathered, crouching low. The prints were faint, some half gone, some barely pressed, but they matched the tread of Daniel's boots. They curved out from where the Land Cruiser had been and stretched along a low ridge, weaving between small shrubs and crumbled rock. For a moment, hope sparked. He'd left the car on foot, yes, but on his own terms. Maybe he was moving towards something, a landmark, a signal point, a safe zone. They followed carefully, hearts thudding, eyes fixed. The prince dipped into a narrow gully, crossed a dry patch where small tufts of grass clung to life, and rose up the slope on the far side. And then, nothing. Idris crouched again, scanning, brushing his fingers lightly over the sand. But the trail was gone. The Sahara had taken it back. A sandstorm had passed through 2 days prior, one of those sudden lashes of wind that tear through like a whip and smooth everything in their path. It hadn't just covered tracks. It had rewritten the entire face of the land. The search team spread out, circling, trying to catch a new trace, but the prince led only into absence the vast southern dunes, an area that even nomads avoided, a place marked only on old maps with a name that roughly translated to the emptiness beyond. It was a brutal silence standing there, the kind where every sound, the rustle of gear, the buzz of a radio felt like an intrusion. For a long minute, no one spoke. Then Idris rose, shaking his head once, and the team knew. Whatever direction Daniel Holt had taken, he had walked into a place where the sand no longer remembered his name. The first headlines appeared quietly: local papers, a few online travel blogs, the kind of places that loved stories of adventure gone wrong. British traveler missing in Sahara, one read. Search underway as fears mount for London explorer. But by the end of the week, it wasn't just travel circles whispering about Daniel Holt, it was everywhere. Major networks picked up the story: BBC, CNN, Al Jazeera. Daniel's face, dark hair, sun-creased skin, a half-smile and desert light was suddenly everywhere, paired with words like mystery and disappearance and deadly dunes. Reporters pulled from his Instagram feed, quoting poetic captions about isolation and wonder, showing followers his last haunting posts. The sunrise over Erg Chigaga, the endless ripple of sand, the words, pushing further tomorrow. Emma, blindsided by calls, found herself thrust into the public eye. Interview requests flooded in. Her quiet worry became national news. She stood outside her flat, gripping the railing, answering softly into microphones. He's done solo trips before, but never like this. In Morocco, reporters swarmed Mohammed, speaking to locals who recalled the polite Englishman with the camera and the careful maps. Speculation bloomed online, a tangle of theories and rumors. Some said he'd underestimated the land, that the Sahara had claimed another life, as it had for centuries. Others whispered darker things: foul play, smuggling routes, nomad raids, a staged disappearance. Influencer fakes own death in desert, one headline dared. On Reddit, threads multiplied, dissecting every detail, from his gear list to his last GPS ping. But for those on the ground, there was no mystery, only reality. The Sahara was not a puzzle to solve. It was an ocean of heat and silence, and it didn't care about hashtags or headlines. The search teams kept moving, radioing coordinates, dragging their boots through the sand, knowing each day meant one thing: if Daniel Holt was out there, the clock had already run out. Above it all, the world watched, eyes fixed on the vast golden nowhere where a man had gone to chase something, and simply never came back. As the days stretched into weeks, the world did what it always does with a mystery. It filled the silence with guesses. At first, the explanations were simple: dehydration, heat stroke, the most common killers in the Sahara. Experts explained it in careful tones on TV. Once the body's water loss reaches a critical point, confusion sets in. You walk in circles, you see things that aren't there. You might even strip off your clothes, believing you're burning from the inside out. The desert is patient, it only has to wait. Then came the weather reports. A violent sandstorm had torn through the region just days after Daniel's last ping. Locals called it the Chirguai, a furnace wind that sweeps in without warning, ripping tents from the earth and swallowing landmarks whole. Maybe Daniel had been caught in it, blinded and suffocated. Maybe his body lay just meters from his last known position, buried under a shifting dune. But not everyone believed the official line. Online, in comment sections and forums, darker ideas spread. Some said wild dogs, or worse, smugglers using hidden desert routes, men who saw an outsider as a threat or easy target. Others pointed to the strange southward loop in his GPS data, wondering if Daniel had encountered something or someone that forced him off course. The most unsettling theory came from a place no one expected the nomads themselves. A handful of old voices, quiet and reluctant, spoke of the jinn, desert spirits said to haunt the farthest reaches, luring travelers into the dunes with voices that mimicked the living. It was an old story, an old fear, but the Sahara is a place where old things endure. For Emma, none of it mattered. She didn't care about theories. She wanted facts, a body, a message, a piece of her brother to hold on to. But with each passing day, the noise grew louder: articles, podcasts, wild guesses, and the truth, whatever it was, drifted farther away, like heat haze on the horizon. By the end of the third month, the search had become something heavy, brittle, exhausted. The Moroccan authorities, who had once stood in front of cameras promising they would not stop until Daniel was found, now spoke in careful phrases. They'd done everything possible, they said. They'd flown the grids, searched the riverbeds, scoured the dunes on camelback and foot. The official statement came on a blistering afternoon in July. Emma got the call before the press release. The search was suspended. Not ended, the official stressed, just paused, pending new information. But everyone knew what that meant. Without water, without shelter, without contact, Daniel had crossed the thin line between lost and gone. He was now a name on a list, another disappearance in a land known for erasing people. Emma sat in her flat, blinds drawn, listening to the news scroll by. Daniel Holt, British explorer missing since April, declared presumed dead after exhaustive search efforts. They showed his face again, his smile, his bright eyes. They showed the land cruiser, half swallowed by the sand, a monument to the fragility of human plans. On the ground, the search teams packed up. The local guides folded their tents. Helicopters stopped circling. Idris, the tracker who had found Daniel's footprints, said nothing to reporters. He simply looked out across the dunes one last time, then walked away. For Emma, the hardest part wasn't the absence, it was the finality. There would be no more calls from the embassy, no more satellite updates, no more search reports to pore over late at night. The world had closed Daniel's chapter with a single word: missing. But to her, it was a sentence without a period, a door left ajar, a breath still waiting to be taken. Outside, the Sahara stretched on, unchanged, unbothered. The wind moved softly over the dunes, erasing the last tire tracks, the last footprints, the last traces of a man who had come seeking its beauty and found instead its silence. In the months after the search ended, Emma Holt moved through life like a woman carrying glass, careful, quiet, trying not to shatter. She kept Daniel's flat just as he'd left it, with the photos on the walls, the sun hat on the hook, the half-filled notebooks on his desk. His Instagram, frozen in time, stayed open on her phone. Sometimes at night she scrolled through his captions, rereading his words until they blurred. Everyone told her the same thing: you have to let go. But Emma couldn't. She became the keeper of his memory. She spoke to travel bloggers, joined interviews, gave quotes to articles. He was careful, she'd say. He was experienced. If anyone could survive, it was Daniel. Friends and family stopped visiting as often. Grief has a rhythm, they thought, and she was refusing to move in time with it. But to Emma, it wasn't refusal, it was faith. Every year on his birthday, she lit a candle by his photo. She emailed the Moroccan embassy every 6 months, asking if there had been any updates, any reports, any signs. She followed desert expeditions online, scanning their photos for a figure in the background, a silhouette that might be him. She watched satellite images, joined forums, and quietly marked off each year that passed without news. People called it denial. She called it love. Somewhere, out there, in the vast stretch of heat and sand, Emma was sure her brother was still moving, still surviving, still waiting to be found. What she didn't know, what none of them knew, was that 6 years after Daniel vanished, something would arrive, and it would come not as closure, but as a question sharp enough to break everything open again. The first email arrived on a gray Thursday morning, buried between spam and bank alerts. The subject line was simple: "Re your brother." Emma almost deleted it. But something, some flicker of instinct, made her open the message. It was short, clumsily written, from a man named Karim, who claimed to live near the Algerian border. "I see foreigner," the message read. "Tall, thin, beard, blue eyes. Stay at Oasis near Tamanrasset. Alone. Maybe English." Emma read it 3 times, heart hammering. She immediately called the number listed. No answer. She replied, her fingers shaking, asking for details, for proof, for anything. Hours passed. Then another email arrived, a blurry photo, taken at a distance, of a man standing near date palms, face hidden by shadow, figure unmistakably foreign. She forwarded it to the embassy, to the search contacts, to anyone who might know what to do. The responses were polite, cautious. Desert sightings were common, they said. Misidentifications happened, but Emma didn't care. For her, it was a spark in the dark. She booked a flight to Morocco that night. For 6 years, she had clung to a belief no one shared. And now, suddenly, someone she'd never met was handing her a thread. Emma grabbed it with both hands, knowing it might lead to Daniel or unravel her completely. In the weeks after Emma arrived in Morocco, the stories began to surface quiet at first, then gathering shape like wind lifting sand. She sat in small cafes, spoke with guides, locals, market vendors, anyone willing to talk, and she heard the same strange thing, again and again. There was a man, they said, a foreigner, alone, seen wandering near remote oases, further south than any sane traveler would go. He was thin, sun-darkened, with a beard like the desert fathers. Sometimes he came to the edge of a village, exchanging an old coin for dates or water, then vanishing before anyone could stop him. Other times, he was just a figure in the distance, walking across the dunes where no road ran. The old women called him the Lost One. Nomad children whispered that he was a spirit or a curse, someone who had crossed into the land of the jinn and couldn't come back. A shepherd near the Tassili Mountains swore he'd seen the man drink from an irrigation pipe, his blue eyes startling in the sun before disappearing into the rocks. Another claimed he found a carved name on a date palm, Dan. Emma clung to every word, every sighting. She pinned maps to her hotel wall, marked locations, drew lines between stories. Embassy officials cautioned her desert tales were unreliable, they said, woven from heat and time, sharpened into myth. But Emma didn't care. For the first time in 6 years, Daniel felt close, like she could almost reach him through the fog of rumor. What she didn't know was that her search was about to draw someone else into its orbit. Someone who knew the desert not as a myth, but as a living, breathing thing. A place where the line between survival and surrender was thinner than anyone understood. Léon Marchand had crossed every major desert on Earth, the Gobi, the Atacama, the Kalahari, the Empty Quarter. He was a man shaped by silence and distance, a name spoken in reverence by adventurers and survivalists alike. To many, he was part myth himself, the French explorer who once walked across the Sahara on foot, who mapped lost caravan routes, who slept under stars while others paid fortunes for satellite phones and GPS trackers. When Leon heard of the Englishman lost near Erg Chigaga, he dismissed it at first. Another fool, another tragedy. But then he heard the new rumors, a foreigner still wandering, still alive, seen by locals in places no outsider should reach. And something in him stirred. He arrived in Zagora quietly, without press or announcement. Just a battered Land Rover and a pack stripped to essentials. Emma met him at a cafe, unsure what to expect. He was older than she imagined, lean, weathered, his eyes the sharp gray of storm clouds. He listened as she laid out her maps, her theories, her desperation. And when she finished, he only nodded once. "I will go," Leon said simply. Not for money, not for headlines, but because the desert was calling, whispering of something unfinished. For Léon Marchand, This was not just a search, it was a test, a reckoning, a chance to step once more into the place that had both shaped him and almost destroyed him. And somewhere beyond the dunes, in the heat-shimmered distance, a story waited of a man who had vanished, and the question that haunted every grain of sand: had he survived, or had he simply become part of the desert itself? In the quiet of his rented room, Léon Marchand spread Daniel Holt's world across the table. Dog-eared notebooks, folded maps, sun-bleached printouts from blogs and travel sites, and Emma's carefully gathered clippings, all arranged like pieces of a puzzle no one had been able to solve. He moved slowly, deliberately, eyes tracing every line, every note, every scrawled margin thought. Daniel's journal fascinated him. It wasn't the notes on terrain or supply lists that caught Leon's attention, it was the details others overlooked. Phrases like, "South Pole stronger here," and "sound carries differently after sunset." Small, almost poetic observations. Daniel had been paying attention, but to what exactly? He studied Daniel's Instagram, scrolling through the photos. Glowing dunes, cracked salt flats, a lone acacia tree breaking the horizon. The captions held hints of something shifting, wonder at first, then unease. "Chicago winds louder than I imagined," read one. "Sleeping badly, dreams of movement outside tent." Read another, just 2 days before the last post. On the map, Leon marked Daniel's known route. He overlaid local nomad trails, old caravan routes, water points, and places where Emma had collected recent sightings. There, to the south, was the anomaly, a stretch of empty land. No guide recommended, no map detailed, no satellite fully captured. That night, under the dim bulb of the room, Leon leaned back, fingers steepled under his chin. This wasn't a man who had simply gotten lost. Daniel had been following something, and whatever it was, it had pulled him beyond the reach of maps, into a space only the desert understood. At dawn, Leon packed his gear and drove toward the place the maps ended. The sun was near its peak when Leon saw a faint indentation in the dune wall, like the desert exhaling. He stopped the Land Rover, stepped out, and climbed. As he crested the ridge, his breath caught. Tucked beneath a rocky overhang, half hidden from above, was a camp. The tent, battered but intact, leaned into the stone for support. Around it, scattered neatly, were the traces of a life paused mid-motion. A kettle blackened by fire, a notebook weighted with a stone, a pair of boots set side by side. Everything sun-bleached, sand-dusted, but astonishingly preserved. Leon crouched, examining the ground. No animal tracks, no signs of panic or struggle. Whoever had been here had lived quietly, deliberately, holding on. Inside the tent, time collapsed. Daniel's clothes were folded. His journal lay open to a half-written page. Leon ran his fingers lightly over the words, barely legible. Night noises again, not wind. He stepped back, pulse quickening. This was no random camp. This was a place of waiting, of retreat. Daniel had been here, alone, for days, maybe weeks, and then, one day, he had simply stepped out. The desert had kept his shelter, his belongings, his memories, but it had not kept him. It was just before dusk when Leon noticed the markings. He had been moving carefully around the camp, cataloging every item, noting each detail. But when he stepped toward the stone wall at the back of the overhang, something caught his eye, faint scratches, shallow but deliberate, etched into the soft limestone. He brushed his fingers across them, feeling the uneven grooves. They weren't random, they were words. At first, they were in English, simple phrases, scattered along the rock face, as if marked during long, solitary hours. Still here. Listening. No way back. Lower down, near the base of the wall, the messages shifted. Shapes, not letters. Circles within circles. Crude arrows pointing outward, then inward. One larger symbol repeated 3 times a shape like an eye, but jagged, unfinished, frantic. Leon stepped back, squinting. He had seen men leave messages in caves before coordinates, names, desperate farewells. But this was something different. Not a map, not a journal, not quite a cry for help. It was more like a conversation, except one half was missing. He imagined Daniel here at night, carving into the stone by firelight, trying to leave behind a record, or perhaps trying to hold on to himself. For a moment, Leon closed his eyes and listened. No wind, no birds, just the low, endless breath of the Sahara pressing at the edges. He wondered what a man hears after weeks of isolation. What haunted him most wasn't the fear in the messages. It was the certainty. Daniel hadn't been guessing or hoping. He had been sure. He was here, someone or something was listening, and there was no way back. The next morning, Leon rose early, the cold sand sharp beneath his boots. He moved down the slope behind the camp, tracing the area where runoff from rare rains left a faint line of greener shrubs. It was there, near the edge of a dried wadi, that he saw it. A footprint. Not old, not weathered or broken. Sharp edges, defined heel, a walking boot, size indeterminate, but unmistakably human. His chest tightened. He knelt, brushing the sand carefully. A second print, then another, veering slightly west. The tracks weren't Daniel's, they were too recent. Someone had been here. Leon rose slowly, scanning the horizon. The desert stretched out, empty, silent, shimmering under the morning sun. But now, it no longer felt abandoned. He felt the shift in his gut first, the primal whisper of every explorer who's pushed beyond known paths. You are not alone. For months, for years, this place had been thought empty. But something or someone was still moving in the shadow of Daniel's disappearance. And Leon, for the first time in a long while, felt the prickle of something he hadn't expected. Not fear. Pursuit. By the time Leon reached the next settlement, a scatter of low tents near a salt flat, the sun was already falling behind the dunes, painting the sand in bruised gold. He sat cross-legged with the elders, shared tea, listened. He described the markings, the old camp, the footprints. He asked if they had seen anyone moving through the area. The elders exchanged glances. No one spoke right away. Finally, an old man named Yusuf, his face carved with the kind of lines only desert winds could etch, leaned forward. "You are chasing a ghost," Yusuf said softly. "You think you find him, but the desert, she takes people in." Others murmured agreement. Leon pressed gently. Could it be a traveler, a lost man? Could someone have survived all this time? Yusuf shook his head. "Some places are not meant to be found," he said, voice low. "Old paths, old places, we do not go there. You should not go there." One of the younger men spoke up, eyes flicking nervously toward the dunes. He told a story of a foreigner wandering near the wells, refusing help, eyes like glass, not speaking, not begging. Just drifting, as if pulled by something only he could see. Leon listened carefully, but inside, a tension coiled tighter. He'd heard these kinds of stories before. Myths grow like weeds in places where certainty dies. Still, he thanked them, left them gifts, bread, water, a small silver compass, and drove back toward his camp. That night, under a sharp crescent moon, Leon sat by his small fire, feeling the weight of their warnings settle onto his shoulders like the chill of the air. He told himself they were only stories. Only the desert playing tricks. But in his gut, something stirred a quiet, crawling sense that the search had crossed from logic into something else entirely. It was near midnight when Leon first felt it, the sense of being watched. He had doused the fire to save fuel, wrapped himself in his blanket, let the stars wheel slowly overhead. But sleep stayed just out of reach. Instead, there was a flicker in the corner of his vision, a faint wrongness at the edge of the dunes. He sat up slowly, heart steady but alert, and then he saw it. A figure. Far across the sand, near the rim of the dark horizon, just barely illuminated by moonlight. Standing planted too tall, too still. Leon's breath caught, his first thought. Another traveler. Maybe a nomad or lost hiker, but something was off. No animal stirred near it. No movement marked its presence. Just that tall, thin silhouette, unmoving, fixed toward his camp. He reached for his binoculars with careful hands, not breaking gaze, not blinking. He raised them slowly, breath shallow, but by the time the glass found the shape, it was gone. No tracks, no shadow. Only the whisper of sand shifting softly in the night breeze. Leon sat frozen for a long moment, every instinct sharpened to a single point. Then he exhaled slowly, eyes still fixed on the empty dunes. For the first time since he'd set foot on this search, Leon Marchand, the man who had walked deserts, crossed wastelands, faced storms, felt something crawl under his skin that he did not recognize. It wasn't fear of the desert. It was fear of what might be moving inside it. By dawn, Leon was driving south. The night had left him wired, skin tight with unease, but his mind was clear. He had packed the camp before sunrise, eyes sweeping the dunes one last time, and turned the Land Rover toward the line of cliffs Daniel had marked in his journal. South ridge, jagged peaks, stone teeth. The terrain worsened as he went, dunes rising like frozen waves, the sand softer, the air thinner, the weight of heat already building, though the sun had barely climbed. Leon navigated slowly, sometimes by instinct more than compass, tracing the rough descriptions Daniel had left. A crescent-shaped dune, a cluster of black rocks, a dried salt pan that cracked under the tires. The landscape shifted as the hours passed, sharpening, steepening, until it felt like the Sahara had turned inward, closing its fingers around him. No more animal tracks, no more shrubs. Only the whisper of wind and the soft hiss of sand sliding from dune crests. He stopped near midday, drinking water under the sliver of shade the vehicle offered, reading Daniel's notes again. Rockmouth, ravine, below Star Hill, one line said. Another, scribbled in thinner ink. If I'm not back, it's here. Leon stared at those words for a long time. Then, without overthinking, he packed his smaller bag, water, lamp, radio, and walked into the dunes, toward the dark cut in the cliffs where a ravine split the landscape like an old scar. The ravine was narrow, its walls jagged, shadowed even at noon. Leon moved carefully, boots crunching over loose stone, hand brushing the rock for balance. He felt the temperature drop slightly, a cold pocket where the sun failed to reach, and then he saw it. A mouth in the cliff, low, uneven, rimmed in black stone, a cave. Inside, the air was dry, close, and smelled faintly of dust and old things. Leon switched on his lamp and stepped in, heartbeat a steady drum. The beam cut through the dark, sweeping across the walls, and stopped. A backpack, half collapsed, a tattered scarf, a broken watch with the strap curled in on itself like a dried leaf. Bones, small ones first, animal maybe, then a rib cage, unmistakably human, half buried near the far wall. Carvings lined the stone. More circles, more arrows, more of the jagged eye shapes Daniel had etched at his last camp. And on the wall scraped again and again until the rock flaked white. A single word. Listen. Leon stood there, the light shaking slightly in his hand, surrounded by the last traces of a man the desert had nearly devoured. And outside, beyond the cave mouth, the wind began to rise. Leon crouched by the pile of belongings, breath shallow, fingers moving carefully. The backpack was brittle with age, the fabric stiff and sun-bleached, but when he unzipped it, a faint puff of trapped sand escaped. Inside were the scattered remains of a life interrupted: a notebook, a rusted pen, an empty water pouch, the cracked shell of a satellite phone. And at the bottom, wrapped in a faded bandana, was a camera. It was a small handheld, the kind travelers carried before smartphones ruled the world. The casing was scratched, the lens chipped, the battery long dead. But when Leon gently pried open the compartment, his heart gave a hard, sudden thump. The SD card was still inside. He turned it over in his hand, brushing off grains of sand, staring at it as if it might crumble. Years in the desert should have ruined it, heat, wind, time. But memory, he knew, was a stubborn thing. That night, back at his camp, Leon sat under the canopy of stars, laptop open, hands working carefully. When the files flickered to life, his throat tightened. Folders, timestamps, dozens of video files, each marked by the dates leading up to Daniel's disappearance. For a moment, he simply sat there, staring at the list. Then, steadying himself, he clicked the first one open. The screen lit up with a jolt of color-shaky footage of dunes, sky, Daniel's own face. He was smiling, eyes squinting into the sun, laughing into the camera. Day 4, South Ridge. Absolutely beautiful, exhausting, but worth it. His voice was light, confident, the kind of joy only solitude can bring. But as Leon clicked through the files, the tone shifted. The next video was slower, Daniel sitting by his campfire, eyes tired. "Something's off," he murmured. "Heard something last night. Thought it was the wind, but—" He trailed off, glancing beyond the camera. Another clip. Daniel's face pale in lamplight, whispering, "It's still out there. Same sound. Like footsteps? No, that's crazy." His breath hitched, a nervous laugh that cracked halfway through. The final video froze Leon's hands. Daniel huddled in the tent, voice shaking. "If anyone finds this, I don't think I'm alone. I see something. A figure. Too tall, too still. It's been watching for hours." The camera jostled, catching a flash of movement outside just the corner of something dark, shifting past the entrance. The recording ended mid-breath. Leon sat frozen in the glow of the laptop, the desert silent around him, the screen reflecting a face no longer smiling, no longer sure, but raw with the terror of a man who had seen something no one would ever believe. Leon watched the videos deep into the night, the glow of the laptop casting long, thin shadows across the sand. In the earlier clips, Daniel was tired but composed, charting his route, narrating small observations, still laughing at his own missteps. But then, slowly, something changed. His voice thinned. His sentences frayed at the edges. "Can't sleep," Daniel whispered in one recording, the camera shaking in his hands. "Kept hearing whispers, not wind, not animals." His eyes darted to the side, to the mouth of the tent. Maybe just exhaustion. Another clip, daytime, his face, hollow-eyed, sunburned. "Saw light last night on the ridge, too high up, moving too fast." Not a campfire. He pressed a trembling hand to his forehead, a rasp of laughter breaking free. "Losing it, yeah, I know, but it's there." In the next video, Daniel was pacing, breath shallow, the camera propped on a rock. "Something's wrong here. I thought I saw someone tall standing near the dunes, watched for hours. Every time I looked, gone." His hands fluttered at his sides, restless, searching. Maybe dehydration, maybe heat stroke, maybe something else. The recordings blurred time, day into night, night into dawn. His words tangled, his movements jittered. The final clips were hardest to watch. Daniel sat in the tent, eyes ringed with dark, voice cracked and dry. "If you see this, don't come here. Don't follow." He looked straight into the camera, holding the gaze too long, too desperate. "They're watching. They know when you're close." Leon closed his eyes, pressing a hand to his face, the desert breathing cold around him. He had crossed many landscapes, seen many men pushed to the edge. But this wasn't just isolation. This was a man unraveling under the weight of something just out of sight. Leon returned to the last video, studying every frame. In the faint glow of Daniel's lamp, behind the canvas walls, movement. Not wind, not shadow, a shape. Frame by frame, he advanced. There, a flicker at the tent entrance, a silhouette. Not crouching, not human-scaled, tall, still. He leaned closer, watching Daniel's face as it registered, as the fear spread like a slow crack through ice. "It's closer now," Daniel whispered. "It knows I see it." His voice caught. I don't think it's alone." The next clip was outdoors rapid footage, the camera bouncing as Daniel ran, breath hammering in sharp gasps. The horizon flickered with heat waves, but behind him, now and again, the lens caught something. A figure, keeping pace, never gaining, never falling behind, always there. Leon felt his heart beat hard in his chest. He rewound, watched again. A shape at the ridge, a glint of something, like eyes catching the last light, too far for detail, too close to dismiss. He sat back, exhaling slowly, the desert night wrapping tight around him. This was no ordinary disappearance, no simple tragedy of lost maps and failed equipment. Something or someone had been following Daniel Holt across the sands, and as the wind stirred faintly across Leon's camp, lifting a curl of sand past his boot, one quiet, unshakable thought surfaced. Maybe it still was. By dawn, the wind had changed. Leon stood outside his camp, the air heavy with heat, but beneath it, something colder, a hush, like the desert holding its breath. On the horizon, a faint haze trembled. A sandstorm the kind locals feared, the kind that swallowed whole caravans and spat bones into the dunes weeks later. He wasted no time. The satellite phone clicked and beeped in his hand as he called in coordinates. Extraction, immediate, storm inbound. His voice stayed calm, clipped, but his heart hammered. He packed fast, hands methodical, laptop, camera, Daniel's journal, the SD card sealed in a waterproof pouch. By midday, the sky was no longer sky. It was a moving wall of copper and red, devouring the sun. Leon secured the gear to the Land Rover, eyes flicking toward the cave one last time. A quiet pulse of guilt, leaving the place that had become Daniel's grave, but the storm made no room for sentiment. The helicopter came just as the first fingers of wind tore at the tent. Its rotors whipped the sand into chaos, and Leon sprinted toward it, shielding his face. A crewman yanked him up, shouting over the deafening roar. As the aircraft lifted, Leon looked down. Below, the camp disappeared under a rising tide of dust, the tracks wiped clean, the mouth of the cave fading to nothing. The Sahara was taking it back, erasing the last scraps of story, the last footprints of a man who had come too close to its edge. As they banked north, Leon sat strapped in, Daniel's belongings tight in his lap, the wind battering the windows. For the first time in weeks, his body loosened slightly, not relief, not yet, but the thin margin of survival that comes with escape. But even as the storm consumed the ground below, Leon knew some storms were only beginning. By the time Leon landed in Rabat, the news had already broken. Missing British explorer found remains recovered after 6 years. Desert mystery unravels. Camera footage raises new questions. Daniel Holt's final days. What did he see in the Sahara? Within hours, images flooded the media. Daniel's weathered camera, the sun-bleached camp, the cryptic carvings in stone. Reporters crowded outside the embassy, their questions sharp, urgent, desperate for a story bigger than a simple disappearance. Emma's phone exploded with calls. She wept when she heard relief, grief, something raw and wordless. "We found him," the officials told her gently. "At least, part of him." But it wasn't the remains that captured the world's attention. It was the footage. News outlets played brief, haunting clips. Daniel's face under lamplight, whispering about being watched. The shaky lens catching flashes of movement just outside the tent. The last recording, his voice tight, trembling. "It's closer now." Speculation erupted overnight. Psychologists weighed in on isolation trauma. Survival experts analyzed his route. Conspiracy theorists circled like vultures, claiming cover-ups, experiments, even supernatural encounters. For Leon, the headlines were a blur. He sat in a small room, watching the footage one last time, his hands clasped tight. He had been trained to explain things: routes, failures, weather, human limits. But this was something else. Outside, the world devoured the mystery in sound bites and headlines. Inside, Leon closed his eyes and saw a man alone under the stars, carving warnings into stone and walking into the dark. And somewhere, deep in the sands, the wind still moved unbothered, unsolved and waiting. They met in a quiet room, away from the cameras. Emma sat at the edge of the chair, hands clasped so tightly her knuckles were pale. Leon stood by the window, back to the light, watching the city stretch beyond the glass. He had spoken to officials, to journalists, to search teams, But this was the conversation he had been dreading. She looked up when he finally spoke. "We found the remains, some gear, his camera." His voice was steady, measured, practiced. "The storm nearly buried it all." Emma nodded, swallowing hard, eyes already glossy with the tears she had been fighting for days. "Thank you," she whispered. "Thank you for bringing him back." But Leon hesitated. His hands were tight in his pockets, shoulders coiled. After a long silence, he sat down across from her, elbows resting on his knees, gaze fixed somewhere just past her shoulder. "There's more," he said quietly. Emma's brow creased. "What do you mean?" He exhaled, slow and uneven. "The footage, the cave, the tracks. It's not just dehydration or getting lost. It's not just the desert taking him." He rubbed his face roughly, as if trying to wake himself. "There are things I can't explain, things I can't unsee." Emma waited, her breath caught. But Leon only shook his head, a tired, hollow smile at the corner of his mouth. "Some things," he murmured, "are not meant to follow home." She wanted to press him, to ask for details, to pull the truth from the spaces between his words. But something in his face, the exhaustion, the haunted edge, the way his eyes never quite met hers, told her the answer was already there. And it was darker than anything he was willing to say aloud. In the weeks that followed, the world moved on. The headlines faded, the camera crews left. The forums and articles gave way to new stories. Emma carried her brother's belongings home, the journal, the camera, the scraps of a life that had stretched too far into the unknown. Leon disappeared back into the deserts, though no one knew where. For him, the search had not ended, not truly. He had crossed another border, the one between what can be mapped and what can never be understood. And the Sahara remained endless, unbothered, the keeper of its own secrets. People have always been drawn to the edge, to the wild places, the silent places, the places that promise something more. Some go seeking beauty, some answers, some escape. And some, like Daniel Holt, go seeking something unnamed, something waiting just beyond the last marked trail. But the desert does not care why you come. It only asks one thing, that you understand the cost. In the end, the sand closed over the cave, the camp, the prints. The storm wiped the slate clean. And somewhere, in that vast and hollow expanse, the echoes of a man's last footsteps lingered a little while longer before even they were gone. Somewhere, out there, the desert still waits, and it does not forget. This story was brutal, but this story on the right-hand side is even more insane.